Hi, everybody, and welcome to episode 40 of the Pet Behavior Chat. So today we're going to talk about noise, phobias, and sensitivities. And let me first of all start off by talking a little bit about the title. Why have I called it noise, phobias, and sensitivities? And that's because we perhaps have sometimes pets, in particular, we're talking about dogs here, but I think cats are probably also affected by this, that might be sensitive to noises, but don't meet the criteria to define it as a phobia. So a phobia is really an extreme reaction. It's an extreme response to a specific trigger. It's usually out of context. It's maladaptive. And if you're not sure about that term, then perhaps have a listen to the episode I did about anxieties, fears and anxieties. I go into a little bit more detail on talking about the descriptors of that. But we probably also have dogs and cats that are maybe sensitive to or fearful of certain noises that might not show as a full-blown phobia or phobic reaction, but that can still cause some anxieties or fears related to those noises. And what's really interesting is if you look at the human field, there are a number of different subclassifications of noise sensitivities. You can have things like hyperacusis, where certain noise exposures are actually really painful, where people are very sensitive and those noise exposures can be truly painful for them, or things like misophonia, where certain noises can cause a really emotional reaction, and they might be noises that might not be triggering to anyone else. So things like chewing food or other noises. So in the human field, and that's because obviously we can ask people what they're experiencing, we have these subclassifications, and we don't have that in the animal field. So we tend to just kind of lump it under the umbrella of noise phobias or noise fears and noise sensitivities, but we might not truly know what's going on for that specific or particular individual. And that's something that hopefully in years to come, we might be able to tease out a little bit more. So that's a little bit about just some definitions and what we're sort of talking about today. The other thing is that it's thought, depending on which text you read, but it's thought that probably around 50% of dogs are affected, maybe not continuously, but certainly, in specific times or during specific events. Up to 50% of dogs in the population might be affected by fears to noises, phobias, or sensitivities to noises. And that is a huge amount. And a lot of the time, these dogs go undiagnosed or untreated, and they just kind of have to suffer through these episodes. We also think that cats, as I mentioned, are probably affected. It's just that cats usually go off and hide and maybe don't show these responses quite as obviously as dogs do. And so therefore owners don't maybe notice it. And, again, it can be left undiagnosed, untreated. And those animals might have times where they really sort of suffer from exposure to noises. And obviously our classic ones are thunderstorms, depending on where in the world you live, and of course fireworks. Those are, your sort of two classic, noise events, and that's what a lot of the research has been done on. But there was a great paper by Griggs et al., which I'm going to put into the show notes, that came out just a few years ago, actually, who looked at household noises. So things within the home that might be upsetting to dogs and cats. So things like appliances, electric appliances, so hair dryers, vacuum cleaners, smoke alarms was a big one. Maybe noises from the microwave or the air fryer, whatever it might be. And probably actually dogs respond more sensitively than we think to these noises. And that might be because they hear quite differently to us. So when we think about defining noises, we can either talk about the frequency, which is defined in hertz, or we can talk about the loudness, how loud is something, and that's usually talked about in decibels. So humans hear on a frequency range of between 20 and 20,000 hertz. That's our sort of normal human hearing range. Now, dogs can hear a different scale of that. So they hear frequencies from 15 to 50,000 hertz. So quite a lot higher frequencies than we would hear. And we think that that might also already be going into the ultrasonic range of hearing. So again, when you think about these household noises and appliances, it's possible that some of these might emit these higher frequency noises in that ultrasonic range, things that we as humans might not be able to hear, but that certainly our dogs are able to hear. And cats can hear even higher in terms of frequency, so they can hear up to 60,000 hertz. And we think that they can hear, or they've adapted to being able to hear this because they might be able to hear the echolocation calls or the ultrasonic calls of their prey. So we know that mice and rats, for example, can emit noises in that ultrasonic range. And obviously it would be very helpful if you're a cat to be able to hear that. So there's an adaptation towards being able to hear at higher frequencies. So that's one big thing. We also think that our pets sometimes find it difficult to attribute meaning to noises. So if we hear a thunderclap or maybe, I don't know, an exhaust backfiring, we can attribute a meaning to that. We know, oh, it's a thunderclap, or oh, that's somebody's car exhaust. But our pets can't attribute that meaning to it. So it's very kind of out of the blue for them, or they might hear something and they might not know exactly what it is, where it's coming from, and if it's something that they truly need to be fearful of. So that attributing meaning to noises, I think, can be really, really important, and probably not something that our pets can do. So we spoke about the frequency of noises and attributing meaning. So what about the loudness of noises? Well, there is research to show that likely noises that are over 80 to 85 decibels are likely to be harmful, or maybe even painful. So 80, 85 decibels, above that, it starts to get a bit uncomfortable. And, you know, we've all been there. We know ourselves that sometimes there are just noises that are you know, really loud, or, you know, that kind of ear ringing if you've been out in a club the whole night listening to loud music, and then you come home and you have a little bit of tinnitus and ear ringing. So those would be noises that are kind of above that 85 decibel range. Well, a thunderclap is thought to be around 120 decibels, and fireworks are up to 140 decibels. Things like electric drills are about 110 decibels, and your average garbage truck that goes by can be up to 100 decibels. And I've heard so many reports of dogs reacting or responding to the garbage truck, right? It's one of those things that you hear quite a lot. And then when you know that actually it's over that range where, you know, hearing is still comfortable, or it's into that range where hearing starts to become uncomfortable, then we can kind of understand why that might be. So these are all the things that kind of predispose our pets to becoming sensitive to noises. And it's possible, as I mentioned earlier, as with in people, that hyperacusis, you know, hearing or some noises might actually be truly painful for them. So that's a little bit kind of setting the scene. Now, when we have pets that exhibit noise sensitivities or noise phobias, they can either be really, really obvious about it, or they can be not so obvious about it. And we oftentimes stage noise sensitivities or noise phobias into two stages. Stage one being you know, a dog or a cat exposed to noises where they can still cope. They find strategies in their environment that help them to cope with those noises. And, you know, maybe when that noise event is over, they kind of return back to baseline and they recover from that period. So that's your stage one. What might you see in stage one? You might see a dog looking for some of those coping strategies. So looking to hide somewhere, moving away from the noises, trying to hide in a quiet place of the house. And there are a number of different areas in the house that we classically see these dogs go to. They're usually rooms that maybe don't have windows. So it could be an inside bathroom area. It could be a closet. Or they could go somewhere where they can kind of bury themselves under blankets. So they might look for somewhere in the house where they can try to escape those noises. They might pant, they might pace, they might become a little bit restless. You might see some mild signs of stress or some milder fear responses in that stage one. That, however, can move on to a stage two response, which is a true distress, panic, fear, and those responses then go into the sort of the realms of being phobias. And these responses are more extreme. The animals tend not to be able to cope. They show things like shaking, trembling, again, that pacing, panting, salivating. They might cry, they might whine, or they might do the opposite. They might go into a catatonic state. So they might shut down and just be completely frozen and rigid. They might try to escape from the noise. So they might try to actually get out of the house, thinking that that is what's going to give them sanctuary. So, we've seen dogs try and dig through doors, or, destroy door frames, or jump through windows, or try and dig under the fence to try and remove themselves from where they think that noise source is coming from. So we can see some pretty intense reactions to noises. And the problem with these stage 2 noises is that the dogs tend to sensitize further. So each new exposure to noises is going to make the next one worse. So they sensitize, they get even more intense physiological and autonomic responses and reactions. And it just kind of ramps up that whole sort of physiology in terms of how they're experiencing the noise in the moment, but also what that means for future exposures. So that sensitization is a big piece. And then secondly, they might generalize. So all of a sudden, it's not just the fireworks that cause the problems. There might be other noises that then elicit a similar reaction. So then all of a sudden, you could get reactions to the exhaust backfiring, or the garbage truck, or other loud noises in the environment. So that generalization to other noises is another big problem here. So you can see it, these responses can be really, really extreme, and they can be true welfare states. And if you've ever seen a video, if you've ever experienced a dog that's actually showed a response like this, they can be extremely distressing and very, very difficult to live with, and, really horrible to watch if you watch your beloved pet go through, a sort of a noise reaction like that. So really something to look out for, and really something to think about. So the other thing I wanted to talk about is a paper that came out in 2018. It's Fagundes et al., which I'm also going to put in the show notes, showing us that dogs that have musculoskeletal pain might be more predisposed to developing noise sensitivities. So pain is a really big one to look out for. So if your dog has underlying pain, it's possible that they might sensitize more, they might react more, they might show, different and more intense reactions to to noises. So pain is absolutely something that we want to get checked out and that we want to be cognizant of. And these are dogs that sometimes start developing noise sensitivities at a later age. So whereas maybe a dog, that's just going to respond to noises might develop a noise sensitivity at 1, 2, 3 years of age, those dogs that have pain and develop the noise sensitivity might do that around 4 years later, is what they say in the paper. Now, those dogs with pain, they also are much more likely to generalize the pain to environments. So, that's something to think about. And they might also be more reactive to other dogs in those situations. So pain is a really, really big one to think about. Okay, so before we move on to what can we actually do to help our pets in this situation, I just want to spend a little moment talking about thunderstorms. Now, a lot of my colleagues in the US and in the UK as well see a lot of dogs that respond to thunderstorms. And thunderstorms are a little bit different to noises or pure noise phobias, in that thunderstorms bring with them a whole different array of elements. So the wind and the rain and potential changes in atmospheric pressure. And sometimes it's that change in atmospheric pressure that's already the first sign to the dog that, a thunderstorm is about to follow, and they may start to become anxious as early as that. So oftentimes they can get restless, they can start to pace, they can start to whine, they can start to show some of those signs before the thunderstorm even sets in. And that's because they can sense these changes. Then the wind, the rain, other things that they've perhaps associated with thunderstorms previously, all of those things can cause them already to start feeling anxious. And the reason I mention this is because when we move over to sort of our treatment piece in a second, the what can we do, is that we need to recognize these signs early on, because if we wait until those dogs are in full-blown panic mode, it's going to be much, much more difficult to intervene. So knowing what comes before the noise event, and as we know, dogs are really good at stringing together the predictors, the what came before. And we might, see them start to show some of these behaviors before. And that's not just around the thunderstorms. We talked about the kitchen appliances earlier. So if, for example, the caregiver going into the kitchen and maybe turning on the air fryer, if that's already a predictor that the air fryer is going to start beeping and making all sorts of noises, then alone the act of the caregiver going into the kitchen could already cause the dog to start to become worried. And I mentioned the air fryer because my sister's dog has this reaction. She really worries about the noise that the air fryer makes, those beeps. And actually beeps are a very common cause for concern for many dogs, especially if ever in their past they've had experiences with electric shock collars. Those beeps can take on quite a significant meaning for them. And things such as air fryers can become, a real problem, or smoke alarms. And even my own dog, Lexi, actually, she is quite noise sensitive. If we ever clap our hands, or if, something bangs on the table, if I drop my phone, for example, or something like that, she'll really worry about that. And it does make me wonder. So she was a rescue dog, but it does make me wonder what meaning she has attributed to noises from past experiences. So just a little note to think about. It's not just the noise event itself, but already potentially what comes before. So lots of things to think about when we're thinking about noise sensitivities and noise phobias. Okay, so let's think a little bit about what we can do to help these pets. So, and it depends on how extreme the responses are. Those dogs that are in that stage 1 that I spoke about earlier, you might be able to achieve a lot by managing the environment, by distracting them, by drowning out the noises and so on. But as you move over into that stage 2, that's perhaps when you need to get the help of a specialist or a professional that can actually give some recommendations and some treatment options that might be medications that might help in those extremer cases. So let's start off by talking about all the things we can do to manage the environment. So if we know that the dogs are really worried about loud noises, we need to do things to help drown out those noises. And as I mentioned earlier, the dogs might naturally already kind of, tend to going towards places that are quieter in the home. So that could be, like I mentioned, rooms that don't have windows. So the inside bathrooms, the closets. I know a lot of dogs like to go into walk-in closets. And if we've identified those places where they feel safe, it's really important that we make sure they always have access to those places. I know some dogs that go underneath tables or underneath sofas in those instances. So don't restrict access. That's what they're using to cope in that moment. So we absolutely want to make sure that they can always get to those places. And we probably want to make those places as comfortable as possible, right? Putting blankets in there, maybe putting a pheromone diffuser in there, maybe having some of their favorite items, toys, if they have any sort of comforting toys or blankets, things that they really like. So giving them one of those hideout, safe places to escape the noises. The second thing is that we can actually help to drown out some of those noises by having other noises in the home, whether that's having some classical music playing, or maybe having the TV on, or maybe having some white noise machines, which can be set to lots of different settings. So anything to help mask and drown out those outside noises. And in that same vein, we can get things that you can actually put over your dog's ears if they'll allow you to. They could wear a hoodie. They could wear a little scarf. I know Ilse, so one of her doggies is quite fearful of noises, especially the fireworks. So she'll oftentimes wrap a little scarf around his head. We have things such as the mutt muffs, which are sort of proper headphone type ear defenders. Obviously, the challenge here is we need to teach the dogs to comfortably wear those. But so anything that might actually, prevent or protect those little ears from receiving the sounds, and again, help to muffle the sounds. The other really, really big piece here is absolutely no punishment. These dogs are not responding in this way because they're being naughty or silly or anything like that. They are truly experiencing an unpleasant event that can go from being quite mild to being potentially painful to being, to causing an emotional reaction to causing a full-blown phobia and panic and distress event. So punishment is just going to make things worse. So we really need to show empathy to these dogs and cats, and we really need to make sure that we're protecting them and we're giving them all the support we can. So punishment is a huge, huge, huge no-no. So even kind of raising your voice or scolding them, anything like that is just going to make the situation worse. So absolutely none of that. We can use food puzzle toys. We can use distractions. We can use play. We can use things to kind of take their minds off the noise, if that's a possibility. Again, those are going to be more those dogs that are in that stage 1. So anything that they enjoy, yes, we can give them a Kong if that's something that they can do. We can play games with them. We can maybe try and do some tricks that they've previously learned to get them more into that cognitive part of their brain. So anything that you can do with them to help distract them that's going to cause a positive emotional response is going to be really great. Even things like giving them a big hug, giving them that comforting sort of feeling in their body, if that's something that they like. And then the thunder shirts go along that sort of same vein. So we don't have a great amount of evidence on thunder shirts in those situations. There's one study to say that there was perhaps an effect, but this was only after 5 exposures. It's variable. It might work for some dogs. It might not work for others. And again, if you're in that sort of full-blown panic mode, it's unlikely that it's going to make a huge difference. So, anything that we can do to just kind of reassure, protect, safeguard, shield from, muffle out noises, drown out noises. And then if they're also sensitive to perhaps the sights, so if we're thinking about fireworks, if it's not just the noise, if it's also kind of the sights that they see from the fireworks, then we can think about things like goggles. So there's a lot that can be done in terms of protection and managing the environment. So what about behavior modification or training, essentially? What can be done there? And obviously the classic thing is the counter conditioning and desensitization. And again, there have been a couple of studies in 2007 and 2008 by Emily Levine and Danny Mills on these CDs, so thunderstorm CDs that can be used to desensitize. Now, the idea is that you play the thunder at a very, very low intensity, and, you can reinforce it at the same time with, treats, so we can counter condition at the same time. However, this can be tricky and it can be quite difficult to achieve because we never really know when we're going to reach that threshold for that particular animal of where they start to feel uncomfortable. Yes, we can read body language signs, but that can be difficult to do, especially it can be difficult to miss those very subtle signs of where they start to feel uncomfortable. The study that was done also revealed that compliance by owners can be difficult because it's quite an arduous task. So we know that desensitization to anything is really a complex task and it can take a long, long time. And then if you think about what we spoke about a second ago in terms of the thunderstorms, how are you going to desensitize to that change in atmospheric pressure? It's almost an impossibility. So desensitization is difficult. Counter conditioning might be more useful. So counter conditioning basically just means whenever there's a thunderstorm or a noise event, during that time, if it's possible, we just have all the good things happening. So we get like loads of food, treats, good things happening, so that the dog starts to attribute a new meaning to these events. So that instead of being scary, all of a sudden they start to become these amazing events where all the good things come out, the hot dogs, the steak, the chicken, you name it. So that can either happen during the event or maybe just after the event if they're not able to take food in that time. So the counter conditioning piece probably is really useful, but the desensitization piece, that gradual exposure to the noise, using things like the CDs and so on, is probably going to be much more difficult and is less likely to be effective. And most owners don't kind of stick through it. And yeah, it's a difficult thing to achieve, I'd say. So that's something that, yeah, that we need to think about when we're thinking about, the training element of things. And cognitive games are really good, and relaxation exercises, maybe a massage or any kind of touch that your dog enjoys. So we're really looking to kind of change their overall emotional state, and have them feel better during those noise events, rather than desensitizing them to the specific noise that they're fearful of. So that's kind of addressing the big things like the fireworks and the noise phobias. But obviously, if we have more daily kind of ongoing situations, such as the smoke alarm or household noises, then we need to think about managing that differently. And that could be as simple as getting rid of some of those things, making sure that we always, we're on a schedule to replace the batteries in smoke alarms so that they don't go off. Some things you won't be able to shield for, but some things you will. If you know that your dog is fearful of the hairdryer, then making sure that they're not in the same room. Similarly with the vacuum cleaner, or making sure that we're giving them something else to do, or that perhaps our partner's taking them out for a walk whilst we vacuum the house. So there are management things that we can do to reduce the exposure to these triggers, if they're happening on a daily, ongoing household kind of way. So yeah, things to think about in terms of management, and things to think about in terms of the behavior modification, or what we teach them in those situations. And so finally, I want to move on to supplements and pheromones and medications that can help, because we do have actually quite a lot of evidence-based things that we can use from that category. So I'm going to start off with some supplements. Now, supplements they're natural products that are not psychopharmaceuticals, so they're not medications per se, but they contain ingredients that we know have specific actions in the brain. And there was actually a really lovely study done by Dr. Amy Pike in 2015 on the supplement Angstane, specifically for, I think it was storm phobias. And they got a really nice result with Angstane. I think something like 85% of the dogs improved. So really quite a big number. So that's something that we consider, and it can consider. And perhaps again, for these kind of level 1 dogs, that might be appropriate for those guys. So that's something to think about. There haven't been any studies done on Zilkine, but that's maybe another supplement. You could maybe combine Zilkine and Angstane together, because they do work slightly differently. Angstane, by the way, is L-theanine, which is a green tea derivative. So that's a really nice natural solution or option. And then the pheromones. So your Adaptil, I think it's marketed under different names now, but it's basically DAP, the dog appeasing pheromone. And it comes as either a plug-in diffuser or a spray or a collar. And again, that's something that could be helpful in those situations. So if your dog does have a safe haven, you can spray the Adaptil spray in that area, or plug in a diffuser in that area. Or you can just have them wearing an Adaptil collar if the noise events are a little bit more everyday or more frequent. So in that study that I mentioned about the CDs, the Levine and Mills study, they actually combined the desensitization program, the CD desensitization program, with DAP, so with Adaptil products. And yeah, they did see a sort of a small effect. Not huge, but maybe something to think about. I think it definitely won't hurt. It can definitely, be something that is positive. So I would absolutely recommend that use. And then we have other medications, and we have some medications that really are just for the event of the thunderstorm or the fireworks. And we actually have 2 products that are licensed for this use for pets, for dogs. And those 2 are Cilio, which is dexmedetomidine or a mucosal gel. So it's a gel that you put onto your dog's gums or the mucosa inside their cheeks. Really important is that they shouldn't swallow it, but rather that the gel goes onto the gums and the cheeks, because that's how it's absorbed and how it works. So that can be pretty useful for noise events. So you give it between 30 and 60 minutes before a noise event, and you can actually redose every couple of hours up to 5 times during that noise event. So that's a really great product, and it's licensed for that specific use in dogs. So that's one really good option. The other option is Pexion, which is imepitoin, which is a medication that was previously developed for epilepsy. But in doing so, they actually found that it had nice anti-anxiety properties as well. And that has also been licensed for the use of noise events in dogs. So that's something else that can be used. And there are, there's a paper looking at that by Dr. Gruen and colleagues. So, we have nice evidence behind this. Obviously, if they're licensed, they have to have that evidence. There's a paper looking at the use of gabapentin in noise events that came out, I think, in 2021, and I'll put all these papers in the show notes. And gabapentin also had a very nice effect. And we also have a paper comparing the Cilio gel with trazodone, showing that trazodone also had a really nice effect. So we've got plenty of evidence, really, for sort of single events. The 4th of July, if you're in the US, Guy Fawkes Night, if you're in the UK, National Day, if you're over here in the UAE, but those specific events that are going to be triggering for your dog. So we've got some nice kind of situational medications for that. If we feel that the dog is overall anxious, or if we have continuous noise events throughout the day, or more regularly, then we also have the option of using long-term medications. And there was a paper done by Sharon Crowell Davis using clomipramine together with alprazolam as a short-acting medication, which showed some nice results. They also used behavior modification in that study. So we also have evidence that long medications in these events can be useful. Also, Dr. Kirsty Sexel, my mentor, she also looked at clomipramine in dogs for these events. So we've got nice evidence to say that, the tricyclic antidepressants such as clomipramine, but probably also the SSRIs such as fluoxetine can be really useful if the animal has more sustained exposure and needs something really to help them on an everyday basis. So lots and lots and lots we can do. These pets don't need to suffer. And I really want to stress this because, to be honest with you, looking into kind of the human side of things, and I recently watched a report, I think it was either on YouTube or on the TV, I can't remember, from somebody who was actually suffering from misophonia, and the way that they described it and the way they described how debilitating it was for them on an everyday sort of basis really made me think that we probably don't know the half of it. And I know that one of my mentors, Dr. Kirsty Sexel, she's given us some great talks as well throughout the residency on exactly this. And we don't know what these pets are experiencing. We don't know what they're experiencing because we don't hear in the same way that they do. So it's really important that we have an open mind here, and that if you do see your pet become nervous, anxious, worried, show some of these mild signs, these stage 1 signs, so the panting, the pacing, the lip licking, the looking for places to kind of escape to. If you see that, already, then we need to start addressing the problem. It's too late if we allow that to kind of go into a full-blown panic event. And remember pain, that Fagundis study, that's really, really important. So dogs that are painful, that maybe have osteoarthritis, are more likely to be sensitive to noises. I mean, how crazy is that? But how important is that to think about, especially in our older pets? And also we know that as our pets age, their sensory world might change a little bit. It's possible that we get some cognitive decline starting. They might not be able to process those noises, in the same way. So maybe older pets that start to develop this, we need to think about that, but we need to think about pain in these guys. Absolutely. So yeah, there's a lot that we can do. And, I really encourage you to observe your dogs in these situations. And if you do find that, they're worried, then please get in touch with a professional. And if you're a vet or a vet nurse that's listening, there's a lot that we can do to help these patients. And we've got licensed medication, but even just from a management perspective, I actually know that a couple of my friends that are based in the US, they actually take on the 4th of July, when all the fireworks go off, they actually take their dog away from the city, maybe out into the country. They hire a log cabin or something like that and just get away from those noises. I know that some of my resident buddies who are based in Canada, who have Canada Day, that's just before the 4th of July, they have basements kitted out that are soundproof, and there are other things you can do for soundproofing. There are a lot of materials and bits and bobs that you can find that I haven't gone into a huge amount of detail on today. But, thinking about managing those situations, that we reduce that exposure. You don't have to stay at home in your high-rise apartment where the noises and the sights might be really bad. You could take a little vacation or a little trip away in these situations if that's at all practical or convenient for you to do. But yeah, so there we go. Noise phobias and sensitivities, because we don't exactly know, what they're experiencing. And keep an eye out for these household appliances and how your dogs maybe respond to them. It could be that they're fearful of those appliances, but it could be that they're fearful because the noise that they're making is causing them to feel a certain way about that. So yeah, my shout out. And if you're here in the UAE, we are absolutely here to help you. There's a period in December, where we've got a lot going on with National Day. The Eid holidays are always quite extreme in terms of fireworks, and they can go on for 2-3 nights in a row. So setting your pets up for success for that is really, really, really important. And again, there is so much that we can do. All right. That's it for noise phobias and sensitivities. I hope you found this episode interesting. Please leave us a comment in the show notes. And as I say, I'll put some of the studies that I referenced in the show notes if anybody's interested in reading them. And I will see you all next week for episode 41. Bye for now.